Hi, good evening, everybody. It's now 6:05, so we're ready to get started. So welcome, everybody. My name's Kevin Polito. I'm the Neighborhood Affairs Manager with the City of Miami Beach. And tonight's presentation is a virtual presentation on reducing your flood risk. Joining us this evening, I do want to recognize we have our elected officials on. We have Commissioner Stephen Miner and his aide Amadeus. Thank you for joining us. And today on our panel, you're going to hear from our Chief Resiliency Officer, Amy Knowles, as well as our Building Director, Ana Salguero. And then I'll have a slide in just a moment with a few more of our participants talking this evening. So with that, we're going to go to our agenda and just go over our meeting purpose for today. So for today, our purpose is to inform, prepare, and adapt. We're going to talk about flood awareness in Miami Beach. And you're going to learn what the city's doing to reduce your flood risk. There's going to be some slides on the FEMA map and flood insurance. And then we'll have a presentation on home elevation. And before I turn it over and introduce the team, we are going to have an interactive poll for you. So if you're participating on Zoom, you're going to get some questions. And it's just general questions about flooding and your experience with it. So we're going to go ahead and launch that. And then if you stick around, please stay around. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a second poll to ask you a few more questions. So right now, we're going to launch the poll. So if you're participating via Zoom, you should have a few questions that may come up. And I'll read through these questions and give everybody a chance to answer. So if you could just answer, our first question is, where do you live in Miami Beach? You maybe live in South, Middle, or North Beach. And if you don't live in Miami Beach, that's okay too, welcome. What kind of home do you live in? So if you're in a condominium, single family home, you could go ahead and answer that, maybe a multi-unit. Does your neighborhood experience flooding? Have you had flooding in your neighborhood? Has your property experienced flooding? Some people have had different experiences depending which area you are. And then lastly, do you have flood insurance? So if you could answer that, we get some live results. I could see we're at about 40%, 45% of those that have answered that are on the call this evening. And we'll just give it another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and we'll be able to show the results so we can see kind of who's on the call today. These results are anonymous, so it's not going to point anybody out. It's just a general percentage. All right, so it looks like we're at 60% and we're approaching a minute 30. So we'll go ahead and close the polling in a couple seconds. So thank you, everybody. And again, we have another poll at the end. So if you could please go ahead and participate in that. So we'll end this poll. And then we could go ahead and share these results so you could all see who's joining us. We have, again, these are all anonymous, but we have some, about 43 people from South Beach, some from Middle Beach. We have a couple people in single family homes, a couple in condominiums. And I think we've all experienced flooding, we could see, some not often, but some of us sometimes during those high rain events. And flooding on our properties, it looks like we've all experienced that at some point or at another too. And great information here that we all have flood insurance. So thank you for participating in that poll. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to our next slide and I go through some quick introductions. I mentioned we have Amy Knowles. She's our Chief Resiliency Officer for the City of Miami Beach. Ana Salguero is our Building Director and Building Official. You're going to hear from her in a moment. Moshen is our Certified Floodplain Manager. And then Roderick Scott is joining us today from the CFM Flood Mitigation Industry Association. And he's going to be having a presentation today. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amy.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. So it's great to see you tonight, Kevin, Anna, Mo, and Roderick. Great to be on a panel with you and just welcome everybody and thank you for joining. Tonight's very important. We're talking about something, a little bit serious, and the whole purpose is to provide information about some of the risks we face and help you all on the line, help you understand what you can do about it. So it's information, preparation, and how to adapt our homes. This is very important because Miami Beach, no surprise, is a coastal barrier island. And because of that, we have a full team of people, working to reduce our risk. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to share some very important information about FEMA flood maps and some of the updating, and what you need to know about that process as well. And again, as Kevin mentioned, tonight is all about options. Every property is very unique, but we want you to have a really nice understanding and a resource of the different options available to you based on your needs. So next slide. I'm going to start with a little bit about flood awareness on Miami Beach. Every city faces risk. We know ours and we are planning for it. Miami Beach is so beautiful, but geographically we are in Hurricane Alley and we are at a very low elevation. So that does make us more vulnerable from flooding, from rainfall, from storms, from high tides, storm surge, and sea level rise over time. Most of our infrastructure and a lot of our housing was actually built without the understanding of flood risk. We recently did a questionnaire a few months ago and learned that about 50% of people had observed flooding, about 27% have had it in their lawn, about 27% in the garage, and about 14% in habitable areas. Next slide. So our resilience to this challenge really depends on a holistic mix of both public and private actions. And here's some stats for you. About 93% of the buildings in Miami Beach are located in a special flood hazard area. So that is considered high risk for FEMA. And about 64% of our buildings were constructed before FEMA was even created a long time ago. So that's some city analysis that we've done. The good news is about 80% of our units do carry NFIP policies, and we strongly encourage all to carry. We do know that non-residential units really need to increase their coverage, as well as 2 to 4 unit buildings. And again, that's really important so that we can bounce back in the event of an issue. So we have a lot to protect. We are vulnerable, but we also have to note we're highly valuable. It's a beautiful city, high property tax rate. We have a lot to protect. We have beautiful historic districts. So that's very important. And then the Unified Regional Sea Level Rise projection for Southeast Florida does highlight the need to prepare for increased flooding. We do know with sea level rise, this is going to become more of an issue over time. So that's why we're here today, education and experience. And next slide. So I mentioned every property is unique, and there are benefits of investing in protecting against flood risk. So it's just very important to note that often there are studies saying that, sea level rise in South Florida is in the news. This week, we are always hearing new things, but it's important to note that that's if we do nothing, that the risks we face are if we don't adapt and if we don't make these investments. So we have also very great recent studies showing the benefits of investing. Most recently, we have a business case analysis of our stormwater program, and that demonstrated that at least $2 billion of investment is reasonable and conservative based on the study assumptions. It demonstrated for every $1 that you spend in your private property, you get $3 in returns, and that city investments in the right-of-way increase property values for each foot of elevation, on average 4 to 14%. So that was a peer-reviewed economic study demonstrating from the city perspective. More regionally, the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact worked with the Urban Land Institute and AECOM to do an analysis of our 4 Southeast Florida counties. And that methodology and approach was a little bit different, but also very clear of the major benefits, about 9 to 1 return from Miami-Dade County community-wide and 5 to 1 at the building level. So again, some really good just information to demonstrate the importance. Every property is unique, but it's important to know the values there. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what the city's doing to reduce your risk. Next slide. So we have an ongoing approach. We're not starting at step 1 and going slowly. We are kind of in the middle of this and moving ahead, all steam ahead and parallel fronts. We have a 3 sort of pronged approach, as I mentioned. First, we are planning with the best available planning, science, and engineering. It has to be rooted in science. It has to have good planning. And so we've worked with many global and local firms to really come up with a plan for Miami Beach. Many innovative studies as well. We've also created and approved many important plans internally from the staff perspective and policies that guide our efforts. So we've created, we are a city in transition, and we will be for some time. So in the same way we are moving forward with infrastructure improvements, private properties are now responding to some of the code changes we've enacted in the last few years. And then third, we have implementation projects. We are one of the only cities in South Florida that have broken ground to really address some of the flooding that we've seen from King Tide. That will also help with future sea level rise. And we're seeing great results from this. We're seeing avoided flood events. But I also think it's important to note that as we're doing this planning, we are addressing broader resilience issues. Safety is first, of course, addressing that flood risk, but also addressing our aging infrastructure that needs replacing, from water and sewer to our roads, integrating blue-green infrastructure, improving our tree canopy to reduce heat and improve shade, making our communities as beautiful as possible, improving our water quality, paying close attention to that, our sustainability and environmental resources, making sure that we improve mobility. That is through our bike lanes and more pedestrian-friendly walkways. There's been a lot of effort and focus on our historic districts and how to preserve them over time. We're looking at private property adaptations, kind of why we're here tonight. And all of this helps to build social and economic resilience. So as we plan, we're also looking for that resilience dividend and how that can help us as a city overall have a better community of life. Next slide. So we are working on this from multiple angles in the city, as I mentioned. I've captured about, 7 different departments, but I'm sure there's more that I may have forgotten. Our planning department is very much that forward-looking view. I want to highlight the resilience code study that is underway, and that will be updating our codes to be able to be resilient in the future. We recently released the Buoyant City Historic District Adaptation Guidelines to reimagine our historic districts in the future. The building department we will focus on today. Our environment and sustainability does everything from making sure those dunes are healthy and strong. We're seeing huge protections from the dune system, to working on climate change mitigation and hosting our MB Rising Above site on climate resilience. Next slide. Department of Public Works designs our infrastructure systems, stormwater, water and sewer and roads, respond to flood incidents. They make sure our public seawalls are the right height and review those private seawalls as well. Our CIP, Capital Improvements team, designs and construct. Our property management team protects our own city assets. Communications does a lot of flood awareness messaging as well as neighborhood engagement. And of course, the Fire Department Division of Emergency Management coordinates disaster response, which in the event of a hurricane also includes flooding frequently. Next slide. So speaking of communications and emergency management, it is very important, while we have you all on the line, to report flooding and stay safe if there is an event. These are two very important messages. And as a city, when we see weather coming that might be a problem, we do send out alerts, make sure people can either move their vehicles, again, staying safe. We look at the information, so you can report flooding to the Public Works Department with the information here. You can also email it as well. And there's flooding on the public realm, which is more public works related, but then there's also those private property concerns. And that can go right to also to the building department to make sure we can address some of those issues. And you can even request an inspection to take a look at that. So this really helps us, having this information, understand the impacts of these events. So it's very important. Next slide. So another important effort that the city is undertaking is creating an incentive program to help incentivize flood risk adaptation. And this is preliminary, and this is a concept summary, but it is exciting that in November, our City Commission did approve some funding to begin this resilience effort. We are very much in the process of developing this. It will need full approval in this year's budget process, but the whole intent is to support property owners to make improvements through a 50-50 matching grant program between the city and a grantee. So we're looking at potentially $20,000 per property. It would be an agreement between the property owner and the contractor, with special consideration for low to moderate income with no match required. So again, most cities do rebuild after disasters, and this is a way to avoid some of that costly damage. Next slide. So I will turn it over to Anna Salguero to talk a little bit about FEMA compliance and the building department role.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. And I'm very excited about talking to you about this next portion. and how we are going to be, how the building department is participating with other departments with FEMA compliance and our role in that FEMA compliance. Next slide. So currently, if you don't know it yet, the maps are going to be updated. And so the FEMA maps are in the process of an update, and the preliminary maps were provided to the city on March 1st of 2021. We've reviewed the information and we responded a formal response to FEMA, which was really a request for additional information to better understand the background and methodology used for this mapping in order to provide a more formal response. There's more information coming up on the timelines for all of this, but I also wanted to talk to you about that Miami-Dade County is working on a searchable tool in order to assist the viewing of the preliminary maps. You can go right now to the FEMA flood page, and you can look up state of Florida, city of Miami Beach, Miami-Dade County, city of Miami Beach, and find, actually it's the whole county's maps that are in there. So it's a fun search through, I think it's 244 documents to find the ones that apply to our city. So the GIS team from Dade County is actually working on making it a searchable site so that you can put your address in and see the maps from that area, and you can put in any address and look at it, and that will make the map, looking at the maps, easier. That should be coming up soon. It's just not available yet. Next slide. And so this is one of the fun things about the new maps. The new maps are in NAVD and the old maps are in NGVD. And the difference in Dade County between NGVD and NAVD is about 1.5 feet. The big difference is if you look at that number 29 after NGVD, that's the year that it was established. So in 1929 is when the NGVD was established, and the NAVD was established in 1988. All GIS tracking and all of the latest survey that's being used uses the NAVD, and that's a big change in the map. So the new maps will be showing all values in the NAVD. So if you look, what used to be 10 feet would now maybe say 8.48 feet. So you're going to see a difference of numbers even when everything stays the same. So it's kind of a fun little thing where we're going to start to see the numbers are going to look different even when they've stayed exactly the same. And so one of the things that we are doing is we have taken as a city all of the old maps and we've already converted them into NAVD to make it easier for us to do a comparison where we're comparing apples to apples and not apples to pineapples. Next slide, sorry. And so here's what I mentioned before, which is the FEMA timeline. And this is, we received the preliminary maps. We had actually, yesterday, we had our construction consultation with FEMA and the county. And today we're kicking off our first community outreach. So I thought I really want to thank Amy for, I had the idea of doing a flood outreach and Amy was like, let's do it about the whole thing and let's make this a bigger outreach. And so I think hopefully you'll get much more information out of this. And I want to thank Amy for spearheading that effort. There is a formal appeal process that's a 90-day appeal period, and that hasn't begun yet. So the maps are so preliminary that we're not even in the appeal process. They think the appeal process, or FEMA estimates that it'll start end of summer or fall of 2021. And then there's a 90-day appeal process. After that, there is a resolution. And so there's like another period that FEMA has to get organized. and then they provide their letter of final determination. Once that letter comes out, that means that the maps are about to be implemented, and there's a 6-month compliance period, and then the maps become effective. So really, we're probably looking at maps being effective maybe in about a year from today, possibly a little more. But it's something to look out for, and visit the FEMA website. And if you would like, the presentation that we saw yesterday, that's also referenced on this slide, so that you can visit and you can see that presentation that was recorded. Next slide. We participate as a city in the community rating system, and the building department is kind of the gathering point of all of this information. It's a series of departments, but the one that, and really it's a huge effort, a Herculean task that is done by Mohsen Jarapur of kind of following up and getting everyone to give him the numbers. Our community rating class is a class 5. The lower the number, the better the rating. And we have consistently, every time we're reevaluated, we have an independent agency come in, FEMA comes in, and they do an audit of all of our record keeping. And Mohsen does an amazing job of really getting that together. And because of this, we as a city receive a class 5, which provides to the residents up to a 25% discount on your insurance. This is a savings of $8.6 million across the city, but to you in your personal pocket, it averages to about $189. And so if you look there, it says the total number of policies and the total value of the premiums, and then the average cost of the premium. So you can see on a condo, if you can, depending on where you are, how much you're saving, what a difference it can make on your insurance. And next slide. So the other thing that the federal government is doing, which is also fun, in addition to changing the maps, there's also a change on how insurance works. And there's this new rating system, and it's FEMA Risk Rating 2.0. And so these changes will happen, and it's saying April of 2022. So that is for anyone who has an existing policy. That's the final phase. That's the phase 2. Phase 1 for anyone who is getting a new insurance policy will begin, or is scheduled to begin, October 1st of this year, so 2021, and April 1st of 2022, or it'll be a nice little surprise for April Fools. The new risk rating will be implemented on anyone that has an existing policy. One of the things that you should note is that despite these policy changes, if you look, FEMA estimates that about 88%, so almost 90% of people will pay $10 or less a month additional on their insurance. So it really isn't, at least what they're looking at are lower values. One of the things to also keep in mind is on the flood insurance, there are laws enacted with a flood insurance that you cannot have a raise of a policy, an increase of over a certain percentage, and that will still apply. So even if there is the maps, an increase of risk in any of the maps that when they're finally do come out, even if, because we really don't know right now, and it's not looking like it's a bad maps that are coming forward, but even if there's anything, the amount of insurance rate would be a low and staggered rate as it moves forward. And then next slide, and this one Mo will take over. Oh, I think we had
Great. So Mo, we're gonna send you a request to unmute. Can you hear us there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Good evening, and thank you to have this opportunity to share some flood information and flood mitigation with you. One of the highlights some of the advancement made. The city has enacted a standard for future. The new properties are being built resiliency, both from today and tomorrow flood risk perspective. We have shown here that since 2016, 116 property took the advantage of making their finished floor higher than 1 foot above flood level. And 198 properties elevate their equipment, and 125 properties did a flood proofing, and 46 property did dry flood proofing. Those are commercial buildings, and 133 properties did the drainage improvement. Next slide, please. So what we do in the building department, floodplain management division, first we perform plan review and inspection for new construction and existing structure to comply with FEMA and local floodplain management regulations and Florida Building Code. We also assist property owners, engineer, architects, and contractor with flood zone determination. We review elevation certificate for new construction and also for some existing building to ensure comply with the National Flood Insurance Program and local floodplain management regulation. We recommend property owners to obtain a copy of elevation certificate for their property to understand their property flood risk. We also coordinate the community rating system of National Insurance Flood Program and Building Code Effectiveness Grading Schedule Program of ISO Insurance Service Office for evaluation and rating review. As a result of this program, property owner in the city of Miami Beach can get discounts on their insurance. As you can see, the photo on left shows that the lowest floor was elevated 5 foot above flood requirements. Mostly the owners, they do this because they are aware of the sea level rise, and also they want to lower their insurance, flood insurance rate, and also lower the flood risk. Next slide, please. So one of the important question is, what can you do to reduce your flood risk? Next, please. So we can think of three options, three categories, all with the goals based on your each unique situation. Number one, they can the owner can do assessments of their properties, and two, living with the waters, and thirdly, flood mitigation. So for the assessment, assess the risk and identify the solution. And for living with water, the goal is improve on-site water retention and drainage and quality of water. And flood mitigation, goal is reduce flood risk through the building and property retrofits. Next, please. So the basic is we have two methods. One, dry flood proofing, the other one is wet flood proofing. For dry flood proofing, we want to keep the water out of the building. The other option is to have retaining walls either around the structure or around the property. And also for dry flood proofing, we want to make sure the wall and the slab are watertight and sealed. In case of wet flood proofing, we want to let the water in a building and certain spaces, such as the garage and crawl space, to minimize the damage. And also by having a flood vents, allow the water comes in and get out. And also we want to make sure all the construction material below flood level are flood resistant material. And we want to elevate the equipment such as water heater and AC. Next slide, please. Also, site mitigation and green infrastructure is very important. Several techniques mentioned here. One, to creating biosoils. Second, you can have retention areas. And thirdly, you can have rain gardens. Also, having cisterns and rain barrels, it can help. And having a green roof and blue roof, grading yards and driveways is also important. Replacing impermeable with the permeable materials in the yard and pavers also important. Next slide, please. So flood mitigation. The most important, I would say, technique and more effective, I would say, technique is elevating the structure above flood level. Sometimes, you cannot elevate the entire building. So what you can do, you can partially elevate the building, and also you can elevate the new addition. And sometimes if you have enough ceiling, you can elevate interior first floor above flood level. Wet flood proofing is another mitigation technique that by having flood opening in a garage and also crawl space or sometimes limited storage room to allow water to come in and out. And also having a construction material water resistant below a flood level is important. This construction material can be cement board and the other material that you cannot have a wood in a wet flood proofing area. Elevating appliance and equipment also is very important flood mitigation. Dry flood proofing, this is usually applied for commercial building and how they do it, they seal the structure and elevate any equipment outside the dry flood proofing system. All openings needs to be protected below flood levels with the flood barriers, such as panels, walls, gates, doors. And also another technique, it can elevate garage floor and also elevate yard elevation. As I mentioned, also use a water-resistant material. So on your left side, you can see 3 images. Can you go, please, the previous? Yes. On the top left, you can see the building was elevated. Actually, the first floor was elevated above base flood elevation. The second is the image of flood barriers panels for commercial space. And the last image on the left, you can see the building. Actually, this is a single family house, and the entrance to the house was protected by flood barriers. Next slide, please. So one of the information is helpful to know for each community to know how many severe repetitive loss each community have. And the way severe repetitive loss is defined by National Flood Insurance Program is if there is 4 or more separate claim payments have been made under standard flood insurance policy issued pursuant to the flood insurance criteria, the amount of each claim exceed $5,000 and a cumulative amount of payment exceeding $20,000, or at least 2 separate claim payments have been made under the standard flood insurance policy with a cumulative amount of claim exceed the fair building market value. And also the repetitive loss definition is any structure has at least 2 paid flood loss of more than $1,000 each in any 10 years period. A 10-year period is very important in order to be categorized for severe repetitive loss and also for repetitive loss. Miami Beach, as of now, the information provided by FEMA has 74 properties in the repetitive loss categories. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Mo. So I believe Anna's gonna speak to this slide here.
That is correct.
So turn it over to Anna.
I'm back. So this is a solution. If you're not at the point where you can fully elevate your home, this is where we talked about the partial elevation. And so what happens is you'll make an addition, and the addition must be structurally independent from the original house, so that if you did have a flood event, you would still have a portion of your home that would be safe and would survive. I like to think of it similar to after Hurricane Andrew, when people created the bunkers on their home. So this is a solution that lets you build your addition, build an elevated addition, and then plan for the future, because maybe in the future you can lift your home or you can do something else with the rest of the property. But it also does give you a home that if you do have a flood event, or when you do have a flood event, you would be able to safely survive. You could return home, and it's a more resilient way of thinking about things, because part of resiliency is trying to get back to normal sooner rather than later. And that is a benefit that a partial elevation gives you if you cannot afford a full addition that's completely elevated or elevating the structure at this time. And so this is something that you can do with your home. Next slide, please. And Mo mentioned it and he touched on it a little bit, but I meet with a lot of people to discuss the 50% rule. So I think it bears talking a little bit more about it. He mentioned the repetitive loss and things like that. And so this does mention some of it if you're doing a repair or a remodel, of which the value is greater than 50% of the market value of your home. And then you say, well, is it in a flood zone? And as we all know, 93%, as Amy told us earlier, 93% of all of Miami Beach is in a flood zone. So the answer is usually yes here. The next one is, has the authority having jurisdiction, and that's what AHJ stands for, adopted the NFIP rules. And so have we, the city of Miami Beach, adopted these rules? Yes, we have. The state has adopted them, and they're in the Florida Building Code. So that's like a yes, yes, with an exclamation point. And so if the answer is yes to all of these things, then you need to elevate the structure above base flood +1. What this means is if your home is at an elevation of, I'm just going to talk numbers without going NAVD or NGVD. If your home is at an elevation of 5, but base flood is 6, you would need to elevate to base flood +1, which would mean you would need your finished floor to be at 7 feet. So you'd have to bring it up 2 feet. This is if you are exceeding, if your remodel or repair to your home exceeds 50% of the market value of the home. Any addition has to be raised. But if you're doing a repair or a remodel where the cost exceeds 50% of the market value, and it's a cumulative cost. So what generally happens is people start their building permit process, and somewhere along they add windows to their remodel, and then they start with other fenestrations and other sub permits, and suddenly what started at 45% has gotten to 50%, and now they need to elevate their structure, but they're close to the end of their construction, and now they have new floors, and they have new this, and they have new that, and they come in crying, but really they do need to elevate their property. So this is why the 50% rule is critical. And whenever I meet with anyone at the beginning of the project, I explain the 50% rule over and over again. Our flood reviewers put notes on the plans when they do the review, because people seem to get excited once they've started their construction project and they start expanding the scope of work without realizing this does add to the cost of the project. And the cost is kept, that 50% is calculated throughout the cost of your project. So, and for a year after. So while you have your permit open, it's important to keep track of your costs carefully so that you either plan for it in advance and plan to elevate from the beginning, or you keep nice, you keep good accounting so that you're sure at the end that you will not exceed the 50%. And one of the things to note is that when they do use the market value, they can either use the property appraiser's valuation of the building only, not the land, or a private appraiser that includes the depreciation of the structure. And so that's important to note, because some of our older homes have very low property appraisal value on the structure. They have a high value for the land value, but the building value is very low. And sometimes just replacing the windows with impact windows will exceed 50% of the property appraisal value. And these are FEMA's rules. These are not Anna's or Mo's rules. So we are held to keep these standards and make sure that we meet them or exceed them, because this is what helps us get the lower CRS scores that help everyone in the city get savings on their insurance. Next slide.
Great, so we'll turn it over to Amy Knowles. Amy, if you could introduce our guest tonight, Mr. Roderick Scott.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mo. That was a great and thorough presentation, and just so appreciate your expertise. I'm always bothering you all with technical questions, and you're just wonderful resources. I'm so happy to introduce Roderick Scott. I have known Roderick Scott for a few years now, and it's really very interesting to go through this presentation on how you actually elevate a home. So this is for those of you who might actually be interested in this as an option. We only have about 2 elevated properties on Miami Beach, although in other parts of the country, there is much more prevalence and much more in the Florida Keys. But for those that are interested, this is really fascinating. So Rod has about 25 years of contracting experience, specializing in flood damage recovery and historic structures. He's personally worked in phases of over 300 flood hazard mitigation elevation projects, and he is a historic building specialist. So he also comes to us today because he leads a group of private sector companies that were created, the Flood Mitigation Industry Association, and they are committed to demystifying the elevation process and to providing education. So with that, I will share this the screen and the presentation with Mr. Rod, and thank you again.
Thank you, Amy, and Thank you, the Miami Beach staff. Great presentation, a lot of information in there for you property owners. And if we have any designers, architects, or engineers, welcome. I wish I was there in person. I love the Art Deco districts and the historic districts. My wife and I were down in there about 3 years ago doing some historic preservation presentations. And so we long to get back there, and hopefully next spring we'll be able to get back and enjoy the great art festival as well. So I'm Rod Scott. I come from coastal Louisiana, live in coastal Louisiana, work all over the country. One of the big things that I have really insisted on in our industry is educating the property owners. In my view, educated property owners make good decisions for their properties. And so tonight I want to share with you this process of elevating a concrete block home, which is the prevalent architectural type. This home behind me is in our community, right on the lakefront, right on the water. It had to go 8 feet up. It's a 1840s timber framed home. So we can elevate virtually any kind of structure. It's just putting the project together. That's the whole thing, and making it look good. Another big important part, because we're going to leave these structures to our children and a younger generation. They were left to us by a previous generation. So we've got to make every effort to make this process be attractive to ourselves and to the future buyers of our homes. So again, I developed this program with the International Association of Structural Movers, who are actually the companies that elevate or relocate structures. Our flood mitigation industry is more of an umbrella of everybody that works, the barrier companies and flood vent companies. So happy to be here tonight in Miami Beach, and let's get going. Slide 1, please. So this is the actual brochure. I've supplied a PDF electronic file format for the city. Miami-Dade has had very good success putting this out, and I think Miami Beach is very interested in getting this into the hands of the property owners. You know, we talk about why elevate. One of the biggest reasons is that the insurance is changing on all your old buildings. About 2014, the government decided that they never charged enough for these old buildings, and the losses were really compounding, and now we're going to hand off a debt to our children, and we just have to fix that. So the rates are going up on your home or your commercial building until they reach whatever rate is the real risk for however low you are below the minimum elevation. And those costs are kind of illustrated up there. Then also it makes economic sense and sustainability sense to not tear down a building and throw it in the landfill, because we don't inherit that, our children do. And so just adapting our buildings to a changing climate and world. If you don't adapt, then, you know, it's not such a good deal. My town had 4 floods last year with 4 hurricanes hitting the coast. And my town is 80% elevated now, so it only takes a week to clean up and get back in business. And all these elevated homes pay very little in flood insurance rates, much like a new home would. It's just the older homes lower that are going to pay more in flood insurance. So we want to help you understand how it works. So next slide. Oh, also, I want to mention that when we do these elevations, every construction trade works. The architects and engineers get commissions and do these jobs and make plans. It employs a lot of people, and you've got a lot of buildings to do. So we see it as a real great employment driver down there in Miami Beach, in addition to building new buildings as well. But we've got a lot of old buildings we're going to have to adapt. So this gives all the steps to the program to elevating any structure. And you can see the process here of the non-elevated, elevated, and then finished off with all the architectural details. So next slide, please. Step 1, figuring out the financing. Where is the financing going to come from for this project? Cash is the easiest to use. The contractors like it the best. You'll get a better price on cash than you will working in the grant programs. Grant programs take traditionally FEMA and HUD, Housing and Urban Development, take 3 to 4 years to get the money on the ground to the contractors. And some families don't want to wait that long. I've worked with a lot of families who have paid cash, cashed in some stocks and managed to get some money together and just paid for it themselves. So you've got a couple of FEMA and housing and urban development grant programs that come into play. FEMA is before disaster and after disaster. Housing and urban development, community development block grant. There's just so many acronyms in all this stuff. It's really confusing. And your head must be really packed in with a lot of stuff now from all the other discussions. And so watching this recording over and over again, you'll get even more and absorb even more and realize, okay, I know what he's talking about. So then the 1, 2, 3, fourth one down is within your insurance policy, you want to always make sure you have the ICC coverage or increased cost of compliance. It's an add-on or addendum to your supplemental to your insurance premium and policy, and it's like $5 a year. And if you do get damaged with a flood claim and you have to elevate, it provides you $30,000 in addition to your flood insurance claim, as long as you haven't gone over the $250,000 maximum for residential. So if your claim is $150,000 and you have to elevate, you can access $30,000 to help you with the cost of elevating your property. There's also a Federal Housing Administration 203K loan program. It's a loan that converts it to a mortgage. So if you have very little mortgage left and a lot of equity, you can actually take out this construction loan program from the Federal Housing Administration, and it converts to a traditional 30-year mortgage with the same bank that helped you write that program. So 203K is the name of it. Watch the video again if you didn't get it all at the program time now. And then another thing, a new program that's out that doesn't have any funding in it yet, that our industry's been working with Congress for half a dozen years at least to get a loan program for property owners. The problem is the banks can't loan us more than 80% of our property value. Very often these projects, well, they're not inexpensive and they're not easy to do, but they make a world of difference for your community and your property and your investments in your buildings. So it's called a state revolving loan, and you'll probably hear more about it in the year or two down the road, where it'll become available for a loan to you, to your property. It's not available now, but the former president signed it into law January 1st before he left office. So that's coming down the road. Next slide. One of the most important things you can do for your property and for yourself is to acquire an elevation certificate. It's a formal federal form that a licensed land surveyor produces. It gives you all the details of your property in the flood zone, whether you have the right flood vents. A lot of properties that were built with these crawl spaces with those air vents in them, there's not enough coverage of the square footage underneath with air vents. And so you may actually be rated on the ground under your floor instead of at your floor height because you don't have enough flood venting. Your elevation certificate is going to detail that for you. And then you can get some help in understanding it from the city and their floodplain managers and planners and building officials once you get the elevation certificate. FEMA is missing 3/4 of them for their older buildings. So get an elevation certificate is my best advice. It'll really pay for itself in information. Then you get into the design phase. So you figured your financing, you got your elevation certificate, so you know how high you have to go. And then they can start computing what the budget would be. And if you're in a historic district or a historic building, you're going to have to go through some additional reviews at the city for the historic preservation part of it. They want to make sure that these historic buildings look good when they're finished with this adaptation. And so you'll get some preliminary designs done. You don't have to pay for all of the construction plans all at once. You can get some elevations done and go through the permitting process, at least on the review side. But then you're going to have to get some engineered plans by a design professional, licensed engineer or licensed architect to have those stamp plans to actually go through the formal permitting process, code review, fire and safety. Next slide. Oh, and also just real quick, you all are going to watch this again, I know. There are opportunities if you don't have to go really high and you've got a home with a footing, the concrete footing around the base of the foundation that's in good shape. there are a lot of projects that get to reuse their original foundations and just build up from there instead of demolishing the old foundation and creating a new one. Foundations aren't inexpensive. They cost a lot of money. They're built like battleships nowadays in those flood zones, but you have to see if the engineer feels, a structural engineer has to make that determination. So here we have the house. Here it was actually under construction after the hurricane, and they exceeded that 50% rule and they had to elevate. So the elevation company was contacted. The homeowner actually did the contracting themselves. They decided to do that instead of hiring a general contractor. So here it is, a sort of partially way through the remodel. So we came in, we laid in we put the steel beams. This is on a slab, not on a crawl space. So we have to actually slide the beams through the walls and create a steel frame. Next slide. So on the inside of the building, it kind of looks like the next slide. And we'll get it here. It's there it is. Okay, so on the left, you see the external beam that actually we bolt all the beams that are going through the house to. That's an outrigger beam. And then on the inside, you see these really thick flanged, heavy steel beams that don't bend or deflect very much at all. A concrete block house weighs more than a wood frame house. And so we put this frame together and we bring it up in the air and suspend it on wood cribbing underneath, kind of like Jenga blocks. And then the masons can come in. And in this case, we actually reuse the foundation. Now there's a couple of types of elevations. I want to bring these to your attention. There's the slab separation, which is the one we're doing here, where we separate the building from its concrete slab. Then there's the pier and beam or basement wood frame structures. And so those are the different types of elevations. Now, if you have a wood floor and on a crawl space, we can take that wood floor with us, with the home as it elevates. So here you have on the left, they finished up the concrete block wall on that one side. Over here on the right, you see the actual pockets where they build the concrete blocks up, but they're going to want to lower those concrete or those steel beams and pull them out once the house is affixed to the foundation. Right in there. Thanks for the little red indicator. That's great. What a team. So then we go to the, you see on the left there where we filled in those beam pockets. See the little fill-ins on the concrete blocks there. And then on the right, they're starting to put the whole scratch coat of plaster, that initial coat of plaster, and then they'll put a finish coat of plaster. And that's one thing I do love about South Florida and its architecture is all the plaster work. On the inside, you can see down below, this is the wood floor system that's getting put into the house now, elevated. So you're going to have a crawl space or an empty space underneath the wood floor. It's made with pressure treated wood, so it doesn't react to the water if it gets water on it. And also it's pretty anti-buggy. Termites don't like pressure treated lumber. So you can see where we've abandoned that slab underneath. And that's just one thing that you have to do with these projects. Okay, next. So here it is, all color coded. The window frames are in. They're starting to build the stairs. There's 2 stairs required, 2 entrances, exits for code. On the right-hand picture, you'll see the auxiliary generator. What's the first thing that happens in a storm? Your power goes out and it gets really hot afterwards. So we always say in these climates and these environments, if you can have a generator, can afford one, it pays for itself in the first storm. Keep that air conditioner running. And you can see the air conditioner stand back in the background of the generator here, down further. We always recommend that you bolt those down. So if you have existing air conditioners out on stands, wind can blow those off, those stands, and that's very expensive. And then you don't have air conditioning after a storm. So make sure your plumber or your handyman goes in and gets those anchored to those stands. It'll really save you in the long run. And then here she is finished. I'm sorry, I used the nautical term. I was in the Navy, so like my boats, it's a she. So it's all finished off. It's beautiful. They figured they added value to their property equal to what they put into it because they had an appraisal done afterwards. And they're very happy homeowners and they meet all the requirements. They've got very inexpensive flood insurance and several of their neighbors are now looking at the process. And that's what happens. When you elevate, others that aren't elevated start looking at it. So you get better property value, lower flood risk, lower flood insurance costs, stabilized property values. Project employed all the construction trades, and our resilient renovation really works for the future of these buildings in these changing environment areas. So I want to thank you, Kevin. Thanks for leading us off and changing the slides tonight, and everybody else, Amy. It was an honor to be here, and really appreciate it, and can't wait to get back to Miami Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So with that, we are going to continue. We have a few additional slides, so thank you for all that have stuck around and stayed with us this evening. So in these last two slides, we are going to make this presentation available online, but we do have a lot of resources on this slide. So maybe if you want to take a screenshot, your two greatest resources is miamibeachfl.gov and mbrisingabove.com. That's where you can find tonight's presentation when we upload it. And then here you have some different tools that you might be interested in, such as flash.org. And these are different ideas on how to strengthen your home. And if you go down, you could see we have the hazard.fema.gov. And these are the preliminary maps that were mentioned earlier. So again, once this is available online, these links will be, you could copy them, or if you want to take a screenshot now, if you want to continue the fun this evening. We have a few more links here, some from FEMA that go into the different guides that are available. And at this point, we'd like to conduct our last part of the survey. So for all of you that stayed on this evening, we have a few more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that now. So you should be able to see those questions on your device. And I'll talk through them while you take the time to answer them. So our first question is, do you feel that you need to make improvements to your home to mitigate flooding? Our second question is, have you made improvements to mitigate flooding? And then please, this question is very important. If you would like to see additional webinars on this topic, you can see we have a lot of resources here tonight, so we're happy to put some stuff together. And then also, how did you hear about tonight's meeting? We're on our email list, social, next door, maybe a friend or a friendly city staff. So we'll give you a couple minutes to answer those questions. I see we have about 66% of the vote. It's almost as exciting as the polls online. So just a few more minutes there. A lot of great information. And while you're all answering that, I'm going to try to go to our next slide here. So on the screen, if you've already answered, you should be able to see we've created an email called floodingawareness@miamibeachfl.gov. Via that email, you could ask questions. If you have any questions about how to maybe mitigate your home, if you have questions for the city on flooding, on flood-proofing your home, you could send that to us via that email. So I think we have most of everyone. We're at 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And we could go ahead and share these results so we could all see how everyone feels. We had 8 people participate. Thank you. So we do have, thank you for participating in all that. And thank you for taking the time this evening. I'm going to stop sharing the results and let me bring this down so you could all see the email. So again, if you have questions on this topic, go ahead and email floodawareness@miamibeachfl.gov. So thank you all for participating this evening. And with that, we're going to conclude today's meeting. Have a good night.